What is the creepiest disappearance case that you know about? Story 1. In about 1971, a lady in Boca Raton reported her daughter missing. Her boyfriend was also missing along with his van. At some point over the years, she hired private detectives to look for the two. At one point, she was told they were living in San Francisco. She was once told her daughter had a child. She never could understand why her daughter broke off contact and continued to look for her daughter. Along the streets in South Florida, there are usually drainage canals that drain the Everglades to the ocean. Some are quite deep. In about 2000, they dredged a canal not far from her house and found the van. Daughter and boyfriend were both inside. All those years they were just down the street. At least she had closure. Story 2. Brandon Lawson. He ran out of gas on the highway in the middle of the night and called his brother to come help him. Shortly after, he called 911 and reported that someone had chased him into the woods and that he needed police. Eventually, his brother and one police officer arrive at the scene and find his truck abandoned, but no sign of Brandon. Brandon calls his brother and says he's bleeding and is 10 minutes away from his truck. That was the last anyone ever heard from him, and searches of the area turned up empty. Answer. I'm so glad you said this. I just heard about this case for the first time yesterday and haven't stopped thinking about it. If anyone has any interest in this case at all, you have to listen to the 911 call. It's the heart of this whole case because he only says a few sentences and no one can fully agree on what he says. Then the 911 operator asks him if anyone is hurt, and he stops speaking. The hello? 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 Is chilling. There's a subreddit for this case, and the 911 call is linked in a sticky post. I'm on Mobile, so I'm not going to attempt to link anything, but I encourage you to find it for yourself. Edit. If you're into podcasts, True Crime Garage does a great audio dissection of the call. Edit 2. The subreddit is r Brandon Lawson. Story 3. I remember reading about the disappearance of Susan Powell in a similar one of these threads a few months back. It's a wild story. Husband and wife, with 2 young sons, have a bad marriage. He's abusive amp. Controlling. At one point, they had to move because the husband's father was in love with the wife. Things get so bad she starts fearing for her life. Then one night the whole family disappears, only to have the husband come back a few days later, saying that he and the boys went camping and he had no idea where the wife was. As the investigation into what happened to the wife goes on, the husband acts more and more suspiciously, eventually moving with the kids to live with his father that they moved away from in the first place, but then lost custody of the kids because the father got caught with a bunch of child-adult content and hundreds of creeper shots of Susan. Finally, during a supervised visit, the husband grabs his sons from the social worker, holes himself up inside his house, and then blows it up, eliminate himself and both the boys. And all the while, they never solve the mystery of what happened to Susan Powell, and she is still listed as missing, although presumed taken down and dumped somewhere by the husband. It's a sad, crazy tale. Answer. That is one of the saddest, most horrifying stories I've ever heard. I remember when news of her disappearance broke, there was a Dateline show, or a show similar to that, about it and everything. I mainly remember Josh's father creeping me the fudge out the entire time and hearing about the family supposedly going camping in a freaking blizzard and immediately thinking, yeah, no. And then when the news broke about Josh eliminate his kids and his dad being arrested for child-adult content, I actually felt ill. I can't even begin to imagine the hellish life those kids and Susan had to have lived. And I feel so horrible for Susan's parents as well. First they lose their daughter, then their grandchildren, and there's still no answers as to just where their daughter's body is and whatnot. Story 4. The disappearance of Bobby Dunbar. In 1912, his parents took him fishing on a lake in Louisiana, and he went missing. Police searched for him for 8 months and finally found a man named William Cantwell Walters, who was traveling with a boy that resembled Bobby Dunbar. Walters claimed the boy was the son of a friend who had given him custody, and that the child's name was Bruce Anderson, not Bobby Dunbar. Investigators and positive ID from the parents determined this was actually the Dunbar's child and gave custody over to them. The town had a parade for Bobby Dunbar's return. During the trial, with the Dunbars and Walters, a woman named Julia Anderson came to defend Walters, asserting this was her son Bruce and she had given Walters custody. The courts dismissed her because she had 3 children out of wedlock. It was 1912, and 2 were already deceased, the trial being in Mississippi, and her being a very poor woman from North Carolina. She gave up on fighting the case. Then 9 years ago, in 2008, one of Bobby Dunbar's granddaughters had a DNA test done. She compared her grandfather's DNA to his own brother's. They were not related. Story 5. The Jamison family. The Jamison family, 2 adults, 1 young daughter, was interested in purchasing a plot of land in Oklahoma. They drive out in their pickup truck to check it out. Truck is later found abandoned, $32,000 cash found in truck, along with the Jamisons' IDs, wallets, mobile phones, and a GPS. The family dog was also left in the truck and was extremely malnourished. A camera is discovered. The final picture was of their daughter, 6-year-old Madison, who looks somewhat distressed. Security footage is uncovered, with the family appearing trance-like and not speaking to one another. The Jamison skeletal remains are found years later, dumped less than 3 miles from where the pickup truck was originally discovered. Remains show no signs of struggle. Story 6. The Sodder children disappearance. On Christmas Eve, December 24, 1945, a fire destroyed the Sodder home in Fayetteville, West Virginia. At the time, it was occupied by George Sodder, his wife Jenny, and 9 of their 10 children. During the fire, George, Jenny, and 4 of the 9 children escaped. The bodies of the other 5 children have never been found. The fire was blamed on faulty wiring. However, one of the jurors involved in the inquest had, at one point, threatened George Sodder, saying his house would be burned and his children destroyed. The Sodders continue to question. A telephone repairman told the Sodders that the house's phone line had not been burned through in the fire, as they had initially thought, but cut by someone who had been willing and able to climb 14 feet up the pole. A missing ladder belonging to the Sodders was found at the bottom of an embankment soon after the incident. A man whom neighbors had seen stealing a block and tackle from the property around the time of the fire was identified and arrested. He admitted to the theft and claimed he had been the one who cut the phone line, thinking it was a power line, but denied having anything to do with the fire. However, no record identifying him exists, and why he would have wanted to cut any utility lines to the Sodder house while stealing the block and tackle has never been explained. Jenny Sodder also had trouble accepting Morris's belief that all traces of the children's bodies had been burned completely in the fire. Many of the household appliances had been found still recognizable in the ash. A local crematorium supported her theory. The truck's failure to start was also considered. George Sodder believed they had been tampered with, perhaps by the same man who stole the block and tackle and cut the phone line. The only bone fragments ever found on the site were a few human vertebrae fragments, although these were confirmed to have never been exposed to fire. Answer: I still can't get over this. How did they not find anything left of the children had they died in the fire? Even when someone is cremated, they still have to put the remains after cremation into a blender-like machine to crush up the bones and give you the ashes. Bones just can't up and disintegrate in a house fire like that. And to not find any sign of the 5 is even more curious. Had they burned and not able to find traces of one? Maybe believable. But all 5? No, I'm 100% convinced something shady happened, and it wasn't the parents based on their obsessive searching down every lead on the kids. This is a case that I hope one day could be solved with DNA technology. If the children were eliminated, we may never find the answers. If they were stolen and sold adopted away, they may have descendants that do something like 23andMe and could try to piece together their family. But that's assuming that the kids are alive. They grew up old enough to and had their own children, and they don't know who they actually are. This morning on the front page of Reddit, there was even a tifu about a man who did the DNA test and found his grandpa wasn't actually his grandpa. You never know what can happen. Story 7. Rico Harris. He was a massive 6'19" former Harlem Globetrotter basketball player who had substances issues earlier in his life, but had made a full recovery and was getting his life back on track. He was driving along California's Interstate I-5 from his home in Southern California to Seattle to live with his girlfriend. He was somewhere just north of Sacramento, exhausted, and told his girlfriend over the phone that he wanted to check out the mountains. All calls stopped since then. His car was found a couple days later by a patrolman near a rest stop in the mountains. A massive search was launched. No signs of him. The strangest part? A driver later reported seeing a massive 6'9" individual wandering down the highway just a mile from where the car was found. A week later, a search was relaunched. Massive size 17 footprints were found in the ground that were not there before. They were getting very close, and then nothing. No trace, no body, nothing. Where did Rico go the first time he disappeared? Where was he for an entire week? And where did he disappear to again? The fact that someone could disappear twice is what makes this so darn mystifying to me. Story 8. Dorothy Jane Scott, young divorced mom working at a head shop. One day at a meeting, a co-worker falls ill, so Dorothy and another co-worker take him to the hospital. It is found that he has a black widow bite. Following his treatment, Dorothy goes to get the car. When the co-workers make it outside, they see Dorothy's car speeding towards them. She doesn't stop, and that is the last time anyone sees her. The next day, her car is found torched, but she is nowhere to be found. Over the next few years, her parents start receiving taunting phone calls. Calls asking if Dorothy is home, a call claiming to know where she is, and so on. 4 years later, a construction worker finds charred bones next to a highway. Upon forensic investigation, it is learned that they are canine bones. And the bones of Dorothy Jane Scott, it is deducted that they had been there for 2 years. Angela Hammond. While driving home, Angela Hammond stops at a phone booth to call her fiancé Rob and describes a creepy-looking man in a pickup truck in the parking lot. Her fiancé suddenly hears Angela scream and drives into town to check on her. He passes by a pickup truck and sees Angela struggling with an unidentified man, but after attempting a pursuit, the transmission on his truck gives out, and this is the last anyone ever sees of Angela. She still hasn't been found and went missing in 1991. Story 9. The Stacey Arras Disappearance. It was in the afternoon on July 17, 1981, when a group of 6, plus Arras and her father, rode into Sunrise High Sierra Camp on horseback. The camp sits 9,400 feet above sea level and is regarded for its historic significance, being the final stop in Yosemite's Mountain Chalet Loop. It was built in 1961 to make backcountry an alluring destination for tourists, offering stunning wilderness vistas, but also creature comforts like showers and reasonably comfy beds. Aris told her father that she wanted to photograph a nearby lake. It wasn't terribly far, just over a bluff. He declined to accompany his daughter, 14 at the time, but an elderly man from their group would tag along. At some point, the 77-year-old man grew tired and sat down to rest. Aris, seemingly determined to reach the water, trekked onward. Back at the camp, the group's tour guide remembered noticing her from afar. She was standing on a rock about 50 yards south of the trail. According to a summary of her official cold case file, that was the last time anyone saw Aris or the last time anyone is known to have seen her. She vanished that day, without a trace, leaving only her camera lens behind. Story 10. General. The highway of tears take down disappearances. The fact that multiple serial killers may have been operating along the same desolate stretch of highway. Specific. Dorothy Jane Scott. She received anonymous threatening calls for months before someone abducted her in a hospital parking lot. Her car was last seen by her friends, speeding away with the headlights on bright so that it was impossible to tell who was driving. Her family continued to receive taunting calls from her stalker for years afterward, yet the man never stayed on the line long enough to be traced or identified. Story 11. Amy Bradley. She was on a cruise with her family. She was last seen asleep on the balcony of the cabin and was seen earlier in the night with the band on the cruise. She was reported missing shortly after the cruise docked. There was no signs of her on the ship or in the ocean. There were possible sightings of Bradley in Corral in 1998 and 1999. 2 Canadian tourists reported seeing a woman resembling Amy on a beach in Corral in August 1998. The woman's tattoos were reportedly identical to Bradley's. Bradley's tattoos included a Tasmanian devil spinning a basketball located on her shoulder, the sun placed on her lower back, a Chinese symbol located on her right ankle, and a gecko lizard on her navel. She also had a navel ring. A member of the Navy stated that he saw Bradley in a brothel in 1999. He claimed she told him that her name was Amy Bradley and she begged him for help, explaining that she was not allowed to leave. I find it freaky just because of how terrifying human trafficking is. Story 12. It's not very creepy, but there is a case in my city that gives law professors and teachers and philosophers intellectual boners. Back in 2002, some guy kidnapped a banker's son. After he was caught, he refused to tell the police where he kept the boy. When it became apparent that the boy couldn't survive much longer on his own, the police president, a guy called Dashner, threatened the kidnapper with torture because he didn't know that the boy was already dead. The case is known as the Dashner case. The English Wikipedia page is very brief, but it's the biggest and most controversial case around here. Edit. Jesus Christ, this blew up. Some more background. The kidnapper was a law student, even at my uni, but that's just a fun fact. He met some rich kids there and pretended to be rich as well. He maintained a lifestyle he couldn't afford, used up the money his dad had saved up for him. He met the victim's sister and got to know the family well enough to occasionally drop the kids off at school. That way, he gained the victim's trust. He then kidnapped the victim, eliminated him, and then demanded a ransom of 1M. He wanted to be able to keep living his easy life. He took the money, but the police watched him and kept him under surveillance. When he didn't release the victim, they arrested him. Not knowing that the boy was already dead, they became worried about his safety and threatened to torture the kidnapper. He gave them the details about his victim's whereabouts, and they retrieved the dead body from a pond. Story 13. One of my top is the Flannan Lighthouse Keepers. They even left a meal on the table. WTH happened? Edit to add Brandon Lawson. Truck runs out of gas. Calls 911 when he seemed to be fleeing from someone. Never found. Story 14. I'm sure there are stranger cases, but this one always creeped me out because I knew the guy. He and I were never friends, but ran in the same circles and had a lot of mutual friends. One night he was hanging out at my buddy's place playing video games and left around 9:30 or 10 p.m. to head back to his apartment. His place was only 3 blocks away, but his key card was swiped at the wrong building, identical towers next to each other, and he tried to make a phone call to a friend that only lasted 2 seconds but ended before our friend picked up. That was the last sign of where he was. When he didn't show up for classes the next day, our friends started putting out flyers. A few days later, his family reported him missing, resulting in a massive search for him with helicopters, dogs, people walking all the fields near campus. The works. Not a trace was found, although it didn't help that it was snowing. Of course, the police treated our mutual friend as a suspect as he was the last person to see him. He's the nicest guy. No one who knew him suspected him for a moment. And also said maybe he was tipsy and fell in the river or something, but they weren't drinking that much by a long shot, so that didn't make sense. Months later, his body is found in an old abandoned barn owned by the school about a mile off campus. Apparently, he was curled up behind some equipment in the basement with his shoes at the top of the stairs. The cop's story is that he was out taking photos, got lost, fell down the stairs, and died of hypothermia. They attributed the shoes to paradoxical undressing, or him literally falling out of his shoes. Except that doesn't make any sense. According to my buddy he was hanging out with, he didn't have his camera on him. There's no mention of it in the police reports. And no sign that he ever made it back to his apartment to get his camera. Would have shown up on keycard records. In addition to that, you could see his apartment tower from the building he was found in, so being lost doesn't make much sense, and his body was already desiccated and partially decomposed when they found it, so I'm not sure how they knew hypothermia was the cause of passing. He was also found to have cuts on his hands, and the room he was found in had been locked. The police claim that when he fell down the stairs, he hit the door hard enough to unlock and open it and cut his hands on the doors. Somehow. Personally, I think he was takedown. Edit. This is John Lacina from Iowa State I'm talking about, in case you want to look it up. Edit 2. Umagoo909 reminded me that a couple and one police officer actually searched that building a few weeks before his body was found and didn't see him. So either 3 people searched the building without noticing his shoes, the broken door, and his body, or it was moved there later. Answer. Okay, my pretty bad theory. He got the wrong building the first time, right? The shoes part is the one that doesn't make sense. Everything else tells me he spent the night there and died. He could have locked himself there. Or someone did. Story 15. Jalik Rainwalker. He disappeared from the home of his adopted parents in upstate NY about 10 years ago. Lots of shifty behavior from his adoptive father. An off-the-grid, paranoid, hothead. Weird notes sent after his disappearance. Here's an excellent synopsis from a fellow Redditor. Also, that name is pure Jedi. Edit. Formatting. Story 16. The 3 Beaumont children in Australia, the parents remained at their Somerton Park home for many years. Mrs. Beaumont in particular held hope that the children would return and stated in interviews that it would be dreadful if the children returned home and did not find their parents waiting for them. Story 17. Hey, I'm actually early to a thread like this. It's a toss-up between Brian Schaffer and Juan Martinez. Brian Schaffer disappeared entering a bar, not leaving it. His friends were there and he was seen on security camera twice, but wasn't seen leaving by his friends or security cameras. Juan Martinez disappeared while on vacation with his mother and father, who was a truck driver. His dad was carrying a load of 20,000 liters of sulfuric acid en route to a chemical plant or something similar when he somehow started driving erratically down a long, declining road. The truck Juan was on crashed into another truck, spilling the sulfuric acid and eliminate both of his parents. Juan, however, was never found after the accident. And no, sulfuric acid doesn't dissolve everything, so something should have been left of him, but nothing was ever found. Both freak me out, and I've been keeping an eye on them for a while now to see if there happens to be an update in either case. Edit. Fixed autocorrect. Story 18. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. I can't wrap my head around how at the same time practically anything you do is monitored, recorded, and stored, but we somehow still managed to lose a whole fudge passenger aircraft. Story 19. Ray Grikar. He was the Center County District Attorney in PA. In 2005, he went on a road trip never to return. His car and cell phone were found in a town between State College and Harrisburg. His laptop was found ruined by the Susquehanna River. No one knows what happened to him. Some speculate his disappearance is connected to the Penn State intimacy abuse scandal, which came to light in 2011. Story 20. Really late to the party and not the creepiest, but definitely creepy. A kid in my high school disappeared after a heavy night of snow. Since he had to walk home every day, about 5 miles, police thought that he had gotten lost in one of the fields he crossed. Since the snow was almost a foot deep on some of these fields, there was nothing they could do except wait for the snow to clear. I believe there were some people who tried searching the fields, but by the time they cleared out one area, it was starting to fill back up with snow. And I also believe the landowners didn't want them in the fields without the police. So, come January, the snow had mostly cleared and police started looking again. Pretty quickly, they found almost all of the kid's clothing apart from his shoes and his backpack, so now they were certain he was dead. Nobody could survive in the cold, especially in the middle of a field with nothing for 2 miles around him. Fast forward a year and it's starting to snow again. Not as heavy as the year before, but still 2 or 3 inches deep. A girl walking her dog, or more accurately the dog itself, found a pair of boots with human feet in them poking out of the snow. No. Connections were really made until a backpack was found nearby by the police, which contained all the boy's possessions. DNA from what was left of the feet found that it was indeed the boy who went missing. IIRC, a DNA test, proved that it was the boy. And what's even stranger is, his left foot was cut clean with a blade, and his right was mangled and chewed, as if it had been bitten chewed off. Edit. I haven't been able to find the article. The small town it happened in doesn't publish their newspapers anywhere online. AFEC. However, after asking my dad if he remembered it, he told me that after the police called off the search for the boy, his parents got called by someone who claimed that the boy wasn't dead and was actually in a nearby abandoned factory. After a bunch of police got together, my father included, to search the factory, they found one of the missing posters taped to a bin. Answer. The clothing being found separately makes sense. Often, during fatal hypothermia, a person will remove all of their clothes shortly before passing. It's called paradoxical undressing. The thought is that either the cold induces paralysis of nerves in blood vessel walls, leading to vasodilatation, giving the person a feeling of warmth, or it induces paralysis of the vasomotor center, which makes a person feel that their body temperature is higher than it actually is. So they feel like they're burning up instead of freezing, leading them to take off all of their clothing to cool down. Story 21. It may not fit here because that case was solved, and it is technically a kidnapping case because we know what happened, but Steven Stainer case is really unsettling, albeit probably more tragic than creepy. In 1972, a 7-year-old boy, Stephen Stainer, was abducted by a child molester named Kenneth Parnell, who molested Stephen multiple times, even convincing him that Stephen's parents didn't want him so Stephen wouldn't try to escape. 7 years later, Kenneth abducted another young boy, Timothy White, but Stephen figured out a way for him and Timothy to escape. They notified the authorities. Kenneth was arrested, and both boys were returned to their families. It sounds like a straightforward case with a happy ending, but it turned out to be anything but. Local DA's office didn't want to charge the abductor, Kenneth Parnell, with child molestation, allegedly in a belief that they were protecting Stephen because at the time, molestation victims were seen as damaged goods. Kenneth Parnell was convicted of 2 counts of kidnapping, sentenced to 7 years in prison, and paroled after serving 5. His victim, Stephen Stainer, struggled to adjust afterward, and he was even bullied by other children for being molested, and blamed himself throughout his life. But he apparently found his peace, as much that was possible, marrying his high school girlfriend in 1985. They had 2 children. He also worked with child abduction awareness groups. But in 1989, at the age of 24, Stephen died in a motorcycle accident. Stephen's older brother, Cary Stainer, grew up to be a serial killer. He is currently on a passing row for torturing and take down 4 women in 1999. Timothy White, the second abduction victim, whom Stephen basically rescued, died from pulmonary embolism in 2010 at the age of 35, leaving behind a wife and 2 children. The guy who abducted them was 76 years old when he died from natural causes in 2008, but thankfully, he had been rearrested in 2003, so he spent the last few years of his life in prison. The whole case is really unsettling. Maybe the only kidnapping case where what happened afterwards is arguably worse than the mystery itself. It is almost like a curse followed or something. Story 22. Garrett Bardsley. I went to elementary school with this kid, so as a young kid it was weird to hear that he just vanished. In a nutshell, Garrett was fishing with his dad in the Uinta Mountains in Utah. Garrett was there camping with a group of Boy Scouts. Moments later, he thought he heard someone yell, "Dad!" The dad went to camp about 15 minuets later to check on Garrett. He never made it. Edit formatting.